Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Responding to SEA and LEA Needs for Virtual Learning Solutions. This is a reminder that everyone will be muted during the webinar, and we ask that you use the Q&A box to answer any questions you may have. I would like to remind you this webinar is being recorded and will be made available at a later date. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Gosa.
Amanda, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Kathy.
Great. I just wanted to be sure the mute wasn't still working for me. Thanks for everyone. And I would say just before I get started, again, while we're waiting for everyone to join, if you could share some information. I'm getting some feedback. But if you could share some information in the Adobe Connect panel regarding what your role is. I see a lot of folks are already doing that, but we'll keep that feedback box open during the webinar so that we can, folks that join later will be able to let us know their role as well, and we can get a feel for who all's on the webinar today. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. As Amanda indicated, my name is Kathy Gosa, and I'm with the SLDS State Support Team. I am delighted to welcome you to today's webinar on this very timely topic, responding to SEA and LEA needs for virtual learning solutions. As we all are only too aware, one of the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic is an urgent, far-reaching, and unprecedented need for states, schools, and families to act swiftly and responsibly so that they can support educators and students as we all adapt to new modes and new ways of working and learning. Today, I'm here with our partners from the NCES Forum, and we have with us Dean Folkers. He's an Information Systems Officer at the Nebraska Department of Education and currently the chair of the forum. Alan Medina with the North Shore School District in Washington and an LEA forum member. Jay Pennington with the Iowa Department of Education and an SEA forum member. Adrian Peoples with the Delaware Department of Education and an SEA forum member. And Don Gessel with the Putnam County Schools in West Virginia and an LEA forum member. Now the SLDS program and the National Forum on Education Statistics have joined together a number of times to disseminate education information on joint topics of interest. Past efforts have focused on collecting and managing data for displaced students, increasing education data use through SEA, LEA, and researcher partnerships, building capacity for LEAs and SEAs to support personalized learning, and just yesterday, our webinar on strategies for leveraging the school courses for exchange of data to support SEA and LEA goals. On today's webinar, we'll hear from one of the forum's working groups dealing with virtual education, and we'll walk through the group's publication, the Forum Guide to Elementary, Secondary Virtual Education Data. We'll also get firsthand accounts from these states and schools regarding how they are dealing with impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. As partners, we recognize the risks of working in silos, such as duplicating efforts and sending inconsistent messages. So by coming together, we're able to leverage one another's expertise and our resources so that we can share information on this relevant and timely topic to federal, state, and local agencies and to researchers and many other key stakeholders. So to get the discussion started today, Dean Folkers will describe the forum and some of the resources they make available. Dean will then pass it off to Alan, Jay, Adrian, and Don for an overview of the Virtual Education Working Group, to describe the contents of the guide, and to share their experience from a practitioner's perspective in responding to the needs of schools, educators, families, and students. Now, we've reserved some time at the end of the webinar to respond to the questions you have, and as Amanda indicated, please enter those questions in the Q&A panel throughout the presentations. The final step will be a wrap-up with contact information for each of the presenters. And now I'm going to quickly look at the feedback, and it looks as though we have a nice balance of folks from SEA and LEA, and we have a number of others which didn't find their role up there. So looks like a good balance of participants, and I think we have more people joining. So those of you who are joining, please feel free to go ahead and click the little box beside which role best indicates your work in the education realm. So now I will turn it over to Dean Folkers to talk about the forum and kick off the discussion of virtual education. And once again, remember to enter any questions you have in the Q&A panel. Dean?
Greetings. Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate the opportunity. Hello, and thank you all for joining our webinar today. As Kathy mentioned, I am Dean Folkers and serve as the chair of the National Forum on Education Statistics and also as the Information Systems Officer at the Nebraska Department of Education. We're thrilled today to be able to share with you information about the forum guide that was created serendipitously to focus on the elementary, secondary virtual education data a year or two ago. And so we'll have a chance to dive deeper into that. Today, I'm grateful to be joined by some of my forum colleagues. You've heard some of the names. Alan Miedema. He is the immediate past chair of the forum in the shoes that I've been trying to fill this past year, and serves as the executive director for the technology at North Shore School District in Washington, and have been probably involved the longest in some of these challenges that we've all been embracing. My neighbor, Jay Pennington, is the Bureau Chief of Information and Analysis Services for the Iowa Department of Education. And Adrian Peoples, he serves as the Lead Education Associate for Data Management and Analytics at Delaware Department of Education. And then you also heard Dawn Gessel. She is the Director of Information Systems for Putnam County Schools in West Virginia and serves as the LEA rep from West Virginia. So as Kathy does so well, she described kind of the context, and the reality is that many states and districts have transitioned to this virtual education space in an effort to ensure some type of continuity of learning. The extended school closures and all of the experiences because of this coronavirus, this COVID-19 pandemic have been occurring. So what we thought was very timely, and it was an opportunity to review some of the resources that are in the guide that was created from the forum, as well as kind of dive deeper into some of the strategies that have been happening in and among the states and districts. So I'll start first with a quick overview of the forum. For those that are not familiar with the Forum on Education Statistics, and then we'll dive deeper into the forum guide itself and then have those perspectives, as well as having Kathy help facilitate the question and answer part of the puzzle. So let me share with you, as you can read, the mission of the forum, but ultimately the forum really provides this kind of arena, this opportunity for local, state, and national leaders in the education data community to discuss issues, address problems, develop resources, and consider new approaches to improving data collection and utility. This is a voluntary, democratic, participative group that is committed to improving the quality, comparability, and usefulness of elementary and secondary education data while remaining sensitive to data burden concerns, as we all have different roles in managing and supporting that process. The members are made up of a representative from the local education agency, a state education agency from each state and territory, as well as associate members from regional education labs and other national education organizations. Now, as many of you may know, but since 1990, the forum has been publishing resources for that really kind of intend to support the mission of what it is that we are about. These best practice publications, topics of interest in the education community range a wide diversity and are really driven by the needs and demands of the community. There's also online courses, videos, newsletters, and other resources available. And all of these forum resources are available for the low cost of free. They are all available on the NCES forum website, and we encourage you to go and explore, search, and utilize and take forth these many fabulous resources that have been developed by the field. So with that, we're going to highlight today one of the not most recent, but like within the last couple of years, resource guides that have been created around the education data. And for that, I'm going to pass over the presentation to my colleague, Alan Miedema from the North Shore School District in Washington. Alan?
Thanks, Dean. As Dean mentioned, I'm Alan Miedema. I'm the Executive Director for Technology in the North Shore School District. Just to sort of place us on the map, we are about 20 minutes outside of Seattle on the very north portion of Lake Washington, if you're familiar with that. And I'm looking at the attendee list. We've got a lot of Northwest people there, so I know some of you are. I'll say hi to Bill Hennekins. I see him on there right now. Hey, Bill. As folks mentioned, we were sort of in the epicenter of the first real big impacts on school districts in the country. I think we had the unfortunate situation of being very close to one of the nursing homes, assisted living facilities that was hit early in the process. Someone says I sound very faint.
Alan, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your audio is not very loud. So if you could speak up just a speck more, that would be awesome.
Sure, I will do that. How am I?
Much better.
Is that better? Okay.
Much better.
Thank you. Let's see. So the forum guide to elementary, secondary virtual education data was developed, as I think was mentioned earlier, in 2016 by a team of SEA and LEA reps. When the forum first convened this working group, our task was reviewing and updating the 2006 guide. That guide was developed to assist SEAs, LEAs, and other stakeholders with best practices and data elements for incorporating virtual education into educational data systems. The working group that was founded in 2016 to update this found that a lot of the materials and information was still relevant, particularly that stuff that focused on policies and scenarios that we faced within our states and within our districts on this task. But we also found that the virtual education environment, as you guys certainly know, has changed a lot since 2006. And I think what we're seeing now is it's going to change a lot again as we move forward. I think we were looking at more of probably focus a little bit more on selective decisions to move into virtual learning, and now we're seeing more, you've got no option but to move into virtual learning. And so I expect that we'll see a lot of relevance, and we'll see some places where we might want to do some updatings. In addition, new developments such as the Common Education Data Standards and School Courses for Exchange of Data, better known as SCED, have made it easier for states and districts to collect, manage, compare, and use that data. As a result, we kept a lot of the same topics and scenarios discussed in the 2006 document, but we also updated a lot of things at the same time, and I wouldn't be surprised, as I mentioned, that we don't do that again. Let's see. So, looking inside the document itself, the content's organized broadly into 3 chapters and 3 appendices. Chapter 1, which I'll talk about mostly, provides an overview of the virtual education options by examining common terminologies, organizational structures, discusses the importance of high quality data collection, which I think some of you are seeing right now is a big challenge. Because you're probably like North Shore, where you thought you had good processes in place, but you find out they weren't as good as you thought you had. Let's see, and then and it also helps you determine potential data collection challenges and policy implications, and we're seeing a lot of those. Chapter 2 is going to identify data elements commonly used in virtual education data systems. Chapter 3 will introduce a list of topic areas and examples, policy questions, and policy practices designed to aid SEAs and LEAs as they develop data elements and systems. And then we've got appendices, as we always have in these documents, that include examples from SEAs and LEA policies, a set of virtual education and distance learning websites, suggested elements for those data systems, and a list of references and related resources. And if you're like me, you probably jump to the appendices a lot first, sort of like when you're reading novels. Let's see. So the purpose in developing the document was to assist states and districts with two main issues. First, to consider the impact of virtual education on established data elements and those methods of data collections. As many of you know, virtual education has changed how we collect basic information. For example, the method of tracking attendance. I think we're probably all struggling with that in one way or another right now. In a virtual course section can be very different than the traditional measure of seat time. Virtual education has also created opportunities to collect different types of data, such as increased information on student competencies. Second, the document was developed to assist states and districts as they address the scope of changes, the rapid pace of new technology development, and the proliferation of resources in a virtual education environment. In addition, virtual education is now often a core aspect of curricula and class instructions. And if my predictions are right, we'll see that increase as we move forward. I think we're seeing, along with a lot of the challenges of virtual education, there's some opportunities that are presented in this to us also. Teachers and students are increasingly adept at integrating lectures, lessons, and group work via computers, tablets, and other devices into day-to-day teaching and learning. Importantly, many teachers and students no longer distinguish between virtual and traditional learning and traditional technology and tools that we use in those environments. Let's see. So, Chapter 1, Virtual Education. We're going to examine, Chapter 1 examines the role of virtual education in the changing world of elementary and secondary education. It's going to review commonly used virtual education terminologies, discusses the importance of high-quality data for informing policy, identifies challenges and opportunities to collecting that virtual education data, and suggests methods for modifying traditional education data definitions. I know that we're having a lot of discussions in North Shore right now about places where we have to be very thoughtful about making sure that we're still collecting data that we know we're going to need moving forward. We're having to make choices about places where we're going to have to, because of the rapidity of the environment we got moved into, places where we're going to have to relax some of our collections, and places where we're going to have to double down and say, hey, this is really important data for us to still be collecting about kids. And frankly, some of those decisions are just based on how prepared were we for this, unfortunately. So what is virtual education? Well, one of the first questions, this is one of the first questions we had to grapple with, right? There are many terms that schools and districts use to describe virtual education, or the mixture of virtual and traditional brick and mortar education. I think one of the things you'll notice on here also that you don't have, we're not really talking about here, that you might be experiencing in your districts right now, is the broader definition of remote learning, right? Remote learning might still include, and it does for us in some places, some paper and pencil kind of activities, and some kind of activities that are not a virtual education model. They're more, I would say a lot of these are more doing the best you can sort of models that we've got in place. Let's see. So we eventually settled on our definition in our document as being instruction during which students and teachers are separated by time and or location and interact via internet-connected computers or other electronic devices. Okay? The broad definition includes numerous methods of delivering and accessing virtual ed. Virtual education can include real-time instruction between teachers and students through an electronic medium. We're seeing a lot of that going on. It can also involve coursework presented online for students to view at their own pace, or collaborative online work that students access from their classroom. We're seeing a lot of that also. I can tell you that both of my kids are in college working remotely right now, and that sort of asynchronous model is a lot more what they're involved with than what we're doing at the K-12 level. And there's new variations that are evolving as the technology expands. I think we're going to see a lot of creativity and different ways of cracking this nut as we go through the situation we're currently in. So as we look at developments in ed tech and virtual ed, we see that educational technology is becoming more widespread within classroom settings. You may have noticed that in the last couple of weeks. And teachers often incorporate virtual education by offering a single virtual unit of study within the classroom. Right? That was kind of the model that we had in most of our classes, our virtual classes before, and then we had to scale rapidly to something else. These small-scale units of virtual ed allow teachers and students to explore virtual learning opportunities within traditional ed structures and systems. I think moving forward, once we get back in the classroom, we'll at least adopt a lot more of these kind of activities, if nothing else, to help keep us prepared for these types of situations when they come up. We are really seeing that teachers who incorporated even a little bit of virtual ed, now that we're into a almost entirely virtual ed situation, those ones who even had a little bit of smattering, they were able to transition a lot more smoothly. More extensive uses of virtual ed include entirely online courses, sections, and programs. The expansion of virtual education has also opened up new opportunities in the form of completely virtual schools. The guide that you'll look at provides a brief overview of new developments that have enabled the expansion and have brought about changes in teaching and learning. Some of those examples are online supplemental courses, integrated devices and resources such as one-to-one device policies. We've all got those now. Those will probably need a new examination as we put them to the test. And completely online accredited education, which some SEAs have provided to ensure that students and educators have access to quality virtual resources, including highly qualified teachers and curricula fully aligned with SEA standards. The implementation of online accredited education, of course, varies widely across states, and I'd say even from district to district, you see a lot of variation. So, organizational structure of virtual ed. Technology driving virtual education permits participation regardless of teacher or student's location, and in some cases it can even be time of day, right? In the scenario illustrated on this slide, we see a student enrolled in an online course through their LEA. Online teacher is credentialed in the state, and all of the educational resources reside within the LEA's administrative boundaries. All tracking is the responsibility of one institution, and funding is managed within the LEA. I'm guessing that's what mostly is what people are seeing right now. I know that's about 99% of what we've got going on in North Shore. Students are no longer limited to taking the courses offered at their local school by their local teachers. In some situations, a student is enrolled in an online course through the LEA. However, the actual instruction can be provided by an agency outside of the state. There we go. Key concepts and terms. Technology advancements have also led to change in pace and user experiences. I think we're seeing that right now, right? Synchronous pacing is virtual ed sections can be taught to a group of students who participate at a specific time, much like a traditional course section, but without a shared physical presence. Asynchronous pacing would be virtual course sections that are self-paced and students access materials, instructions, and assignments at their convenience within certain deadlines. Students may also have the option of testing out of a course in a situation like this. Combined would be the third alternative, in which it combines both kinds of activities with specific synchronous activities such as online discussions or office hours, which we're having a lot of right now, webinars, or could even be a phone conference. In addition to variability in pace, virtual education can offer increased opportunities for tailoring teaching and learning to the individual student's needs. Individualized instructions that's paced to the learning need of a different learner, where students progress at different speeds, and differentiated instruction that is tailored to the learning preferences of the different learner, where methods and instructional approaches can vary according according to the preference of each student or what research has found to be best. Oh, bless you. Personalization can also have much more in virtual education, I think, is instruction paced to learning needs and tailored to learning preferences and the specific interests of the students. This is kind of an area that I'm guessing we're not seeing a lot of right now, just because it can be more complicated, more complex, but I still believe that virtual learning, once we adopt that model more aggressively, offers the opportunity for higher degree of personalization. I would say right now, at least within North Shore, hasn't been a whole lot of time to focus a whole lot on the personalization piece. If, God forbid, we end up in the same situation next year or moving forward, I would hope we'd be in a better position to capitalize on that. Virtual education data. So advancements in growth in virtual ed have provided educational agencies, educators and students with options for incorporating virtual education experiences in their teaching and learning. However, in order to make informed decisions about these opportunities, stakeholders need to understand how the new opportunities in technology impact educational policies and educational data. We're seeing a lot of that in North Shore right now. I know initially, as we transitioned to this model, we struggled a lot with the idea of how do I modify my existing policies and procedures to work in the environment that we're finding ourselves in right now? How do we modify some of our systems to accommodate this new environment? And in some cases, we really got bogged down in this area on trying to make this new round peg fit the existing square hole. We're getting better, though, as we move on. Existing data systems that are capable of providing high quality data for accountability and decision making can't always accommodate virtual education data. We've seen that certainly in some places, especially when there's discrepancies between the types of data relevant to virtual education and data elements collected by traditional educational data systems. I mean, the most obvious one for me is the whole concept of what attendance even means at this point. It's not just that it can be a complicated thing to collect from kids mechanically. I'd say the bigger issue is what is attendance when we're working online with one another? What's the value of attendance? How do we measure whether a kid just was logged in or whether a kid was active and participant? I would also challenge us and say, we've highlighted here a data collection question that's always been there, because a kid online not actively participating, we can probably track that within a data system, but a kid sleeping in the back of the room or staring off into space who was just as disengaged, we never tried to collect that data before. So I think it's a new variation on an existing problem. Oops, I hit two there. Some of the challenges to collecting high quality virtual education data. You guys could probably fill this in for me at this point. But the working group did identify some of the most common challenges that SEAs and LEAs face when trying to collect this high quality virtual education data. Use of virtual education and the types of virtual education offered can vary greatly between SEAs and LEAs. So transportability, relevance from one data set to another can be very complicated. Our definitions become even more disparate from one another. Data management and governance can be challenging, such as when students are enrolled in multiple districts or schools must rapidly adapt to collecting virtual education data. We're doing that right now. I think a lot of our governance models are really being stretched. Virtual education providers may have data collection timelines that vary from an SEA's or LEA's timeline. We are seeing some of that for certain. Accurately tracking and accounting for students can be difficult when students are enrolled in virtual ed classes that are not state sponsored. I would say just tracking and collecting data from students in a virtual environment is extremely difficult, we're seeing. Grade levels and school assignments are more flexible in virtual environments, that's for certain. Grading is more challenging in a virtual environment, we're finding out. Information that is relevant to virtual education may not even comply with established reporting schemas. Virtual education, instruction and coursework can be accessed at any time from any location, and that blurs that distinction between instructional time and homework and attendance and enrollment, as we discussed a little bit earlier. Virtual education courses may not fit traditional ideas of what a course duration or structure. Educational organizations, educators, students, parents, researchers, all the stakeholders are in need of information on what type of virtual education is most effective. However, the evaluation can be very difficult without high quality data. Um, we'll be seeing that over the next several months. And LEAs must often change established structures and cultures to accommodate virtual education. Even just the challenges of when are people going to meet online? I think you're probably seeing that right now. Just those nuts and bolts kind of activities become very complicated in a student's schedule and in a teacher's schedule. And various systems need to accurately track and evaluate virtual education. They may not be integrated with their existing systems. So, opportunities that are available. It's important to acknowledge the challenges, but it's also worth noting that students, educators, and policymakers benefit from new and different types of data that are available through virtual education. And I think it's important in what we go through right now that we not lose sight of that. New technologies can facilitate easier implementation of individual, personalized, and differentiated instruction. That's a hard one to see right now, but I do believe that's true. Increased ability to award course credit based on student mastery of material rather than time spent in class becomes possible. More precise information on student skills and knowledge, as well as the ability to view data, such as the path a student took to get to a problem. The fear of tracking students too closely within a virtual environment is certainly a real concern, but there are also opportunities there, right? It's easier for us to see how did the student get to where they're at by the rich sets of data that can be collected. And immediate feedback on student assessments are available to us in a virtual environment. So that kind of wraps up chapter 1 for me. I'm going to pass it on now to my colleague and friend, Jay Pennington from the Iowa Department of Education. Jay?
Thanks, Alan. So I'm going to cover Chapter 2. I'm Jay Pennington, the Bureau Chief of the Bureau of Information and Analysis Services from the Iowa Department of Ed, and was a work group member of the refresh and update that the forum did to the virtual education data guide. You know, as part of the forum, we're really interested in education data and ensuring the quality of that data that we collect. Certainly the rapid expansion of virtual learning opportunities because of COVID make this topic particularly important. So Chapter 2 offers an overview of virtual education data elements from 3 broad categories. First, elements that identify K-12 virtual learning as well as blended data. And when we say blended, we really mean those that are occurring both virtually, but also in some cases in the classroom as well. So sort of that hybrid approach. Second, it also focuses on elements that clarify the organizational responsibilities for students who are engaged in the virtual learning. And then thirdly, elements that capture accurate data on both a traditional and a virtual method of reporting things like course section time and course credit completion. Sorry about that, I was accidentally muted. The elements identified in this document are not meant to provide a comprehensive list of virtual education data elements. They're really intended as a starting point for agencies and SEAs and LEAs to develop and expand their data systems. Certainly this is we thought of many different data elements, but this list can be modified and adapted to meet the needs of your agency. So digging in a little bit further, here's some examples of both K-12 virtual and blended data elements. So we've got the virtual indicator. And this indicator can be added to a school, an institution, a program, or even a course section that focuses primarily where the instruction occurs with students and teachers that are both separated by time and location, so in this virtual world. The second data element is the interaction mode. You know, as Alan mentioned, some of this is synchronous learning, you know, through Zoom or Google Hangouts, where that educator, you know, has that virtual FaceTime with all the students. We also know that there's a lot of asynchronous learning that's going to occur in this virtual world. And so how do you account for that? And so this course interaction mode is really meant to designate the primary type, whether synchronous or asynchronous. Third, we've got the blended learning mode type. And this is a type of formal education program in which a student learns at least in part through online learning. There's some elements of student control over the time and pace or path, and it's supervised away from the brick and mortar, so, you know, could be in the home in all likelihood in this particular scenario. And then lastly, the course section instructional delivery mode. So what is the primary setting for this delivery of the course information? So in many cases, this will be in that home environment or in that virtual learning space. Next, we've got data elements that we've identified around the organization that's responsible for the data. So the first one, the organization identifier, you know, this would be a unique ID for the institution that's responsible. It could be the school. It could be a virtual school, depending on how the virtual learning is organized. Next, we've got the organization type, and this is the responsibility the organization has for the student. So who's delivering or issuing or rewarding that course? Is it that online provider, perhaps a third party, or is it the school that's delivering this? Perhaps it's the regular instructor. Next, we've got the organization name. You know, that one's pretty self-explanatory, the name of the organization or institution that is responsible. We've got a district identifier, so the district that is responsible for the specific educational service or instruction of the student. That may be the same as the brick and mortar identifier. It may be different. The district type that is responsible for that student. Next, we've got the school identifier. So I know in Iowa and many places, we do have a few examples of virtual schools. And so is it that virtual school that is delivering the service, or is it the brick and mortar that has just switched to this online mode of delivery in order to deliver education to students? And then lastly, we've got the responsible school type, the type of services or instruction that the school is responsible for providing. So is it online, is it blended, et cetera. The last area in Chapter 2 was where we identified traditional versus virtual course credit and achievement data elements. So we've got the course credit units. So it's the type of credit unit. So is it a unit? Is it a semester? Is it a quarter? That's associated with the credit hours earned for the course. We've got an achievement criteria. So is this a competency-based completion of the achievement or the award. Next, we've got a competency set of completion criteria. So is it a criteria for the set of competencies that represent either completion or partial completion of a unit, a course, a program, a degree, or some other type of award. We also identified a competency set completion criteria threshold. So in the competency world, are there a minimum numbers of competencies that need to be achieved for either full completion or partial completion of a unit, course, or program. And then lastly, the course section time required for completion. This could be the actual number of clock minutes or hours, or it could be an estimated number based on the asynchronous activity that's occurring for that student to be able to complete perhaps a unit either online or synchronously. Next, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Adrian Peoples, who's going to talk about Chapter 3.
Jay, thank you very much. I'm Adrian Peoples from the Delaware Department of Education. I, along with Jay, did work on this guide, and I'm going to try to keep my section brief. We're running out of time here, so I'm going to try to get us back, save us enough time to answer some of these brilliant questions I see coming across the ticker. So Chapter 3, there's about 20 pages in the current guide that deal with policy questions and give you examples of how to handle these policy questions and the resulting data from those policy questions in the guide. So you'll find that there are about 24 policy areas or topic areas, and they stretch across 4 major disciplines, right? So you've got school, curriculum and learning environment, as well as students and staff, right? So there are 24 policy areas that you'd like to think about. You've probably got policies in your LEAs or your SDAs around the brick and mortar versions of the schools or the traditional versions of the schools. You'll just have to extend your policies to the virtual environment and in some cases create policies. And so what we try to do is give you an example. So this is each topic area, all 24 of them will give you an example. It will then give you a set of policy questions based around that example, and then give you some type of real world application of some of those policies and what some of the SEAs and LEAs around the country actually got a chance to do. So again, Chapter 3, about 20 pages long, 24 topic areas around 4 categories that really kind of do a deeper dive into the what you should be thinking about from a policy perspective as it relates to virtual education and how to integrate that information and data into your traditional environment for a more comprehensive picture of your education system now that it has shifted to a blended style. And then you'll get some common practices to go along with that. And then we move on to the next topic. That's just an example of topic area 8 out of 24. And then lastly, there are a bunch of appendices to this guide. We'll give you some examples of real-world SEA and LEA policies. We'll give you some links to some virtual websites, and then also some suggested virtual data systems depending upon if you're going to establish your own virtual school within an LEA, whether you're going to contract out or you're going to have a state-run virtual school or what have you. And so with that said, I believe Dawn is up next, and I will pass the mic to, no, Alan, we're back to you, I think. So we're going back to Alan.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. So can you guys hear me better now? I swapped to a different microphone. I'm going to say yes, you can hear me better. Okay, Good. For perspectives, I'll just give you guys a little background on sort of timeline in North Shore that we ran through. So on February 26th, on the night on February 26th, we got a message from one of our teachers who had traveled outside of the country, specifically had gone to Italy for a vacation. We have a thing called midwinter break that happened right before that. And she reported back to us on a Wednesday that she had been exposed apparently to coronavirus during her trip in Italy and had actually come back to school and taught for 2 days, feeling fine, and then had started to feel a little, we'll say, peckish at that point. So we right away shut down one of our high schools and so we could do a deep clean on the place and started doing some planning within our district of what are we going to do next, because we had enough foresight, fortunately, to say one of the things I think is going to happen is this is going to be the start and not the finish of this. So we got together on that weekend, that last weekend of February, first weekend of March, and started planning for how we're going to move this district to an online environment, given that we are not a take-home one-to-one district. We have one-to-one devices for kids, but only about 200 of them are going home. We don't have a learning management system, and we don't even really have a big presence in virtual education, but we thought we're going to be in that area pretty doggone quick here, so what are we going to do? So over the course of Saturday and Sunday that week, we started planning out how do we move virtually in a hurry. When we got back to school on Monday, we'd had more schools report some kind of contact with somebody who had been exposed to coronavirus, mostly through the assisted living facility I talked about earlier. And we started having schools sort of dropping like flies with the idea that they had either a student or a staff member in that building that had secondary or primary exposure to someone who had tested positively. So we decided Monday we were going to start talking with the buildings about the plan for moving to a virtual environment, start distributing devices, basically raiding our computer carts at the buildings, sending devices home with kids, gathering up all the hot spots that we could find. We had some on campus. I got on the third Sunday while we were sitting in a meeting. Tuesday, we said the kids stay home. We're going to teach teachers how to do virtual education Tuesday at school. And then Wednesday, kids come into the building, get stuff you need to get. And then Thursday, Friday, everybody goes home. Teachers figure out how to teach online. And the following Monday, we're up and running. So it felt like a crazy whirlwind of activity there. We got to keep that model going for about 3 days, until the governor, as things started spreading across the whole state, basically shut down schools across King, Snohomish, and Pierce counties in Washington, which eventually, of course, extended to the whole state. And we took a little bit of a breather, started talking with teachers about not the technology of delivering of virtual and remote learning, but the educational concepts that you want to do with blended learning. We did that for about a week and a half, and then we fired things back up again. That was about mid-March, and we've been going hard ever since, and it has been a crazy whirlwind of activity. We've got food services that has kept moving forward. We're supplying lunches to kids. That the number of lunches that we've provided has increased, I think, every single day. Daycare for first and emergency and essential responders, we're providing that for them. And and I think it's important, though, to recognize we've moved to a completely virtual learning environment in North Shore, and we did it pretty quick. But the key for us being able to do this, if I'm being completely candid, we have 15% free and reduced lunch in the district, right? We got 24,000 kids. We got every kid home internet access by only distributing about 600 hotspots. I mean, that is not the environment that most people work in. We have every kid with a one-to-one take-home advice environment by only having to distribute about 6,000 computers. And a lot of people just aren't in that place. So I want to be real careful to say that the model that's been successful in North Shore and moving from non-virtual to virtual owes a lot to our demographics. And that's just, I can't be any more candid than that. So I'll pass it on to Jay, to talk about the perspective from Iowa.
Thanks, Alan. And I'll try to be brief and just bring a couple of points from a state level perspective. Before I got on this webinar this afternoon, I was coming from a webinar that we were hosting within Iowa, and we've been doing them sort of twice a week on a myriad of topics, from school finance, how do I, during this closure, pay folks, things like assessment and accountability impact. This one this afternoon was focused solely on sort of a third round and what we're calling continuous learning or digital learning or virtual learning. Our schools voluntarily closed in mid-March. They'll be closed through the end of April, officially at this point. And there's sort of three blends that are happening within Iowa. This idea of voluntary, so where districts provide voluntary online learning opportunities for kids, similar to like getting extra credit where schools closed, but it's not a required activity. The next is required, and that is, delivering, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, all kids need to attend. And then a combination. In some cases, districts are choosing to do voluntary, let's say, K-6, and then require high school or middle school to be online. And as Alan mentioned, equity is a very important consideration in Iowa. Just to give a sense, we've got about 10% of districts that educate about 52% of the student population, and then the other 90% educate the other 48%. So there's a lot of rural districts, and so you have the the issues of economic diversity, in the urban areas, but then you also have the issue of geographic issues related to getting hotspots and the ability for folks in the rural part of the state to be able to connect. So there are some very important considerations. Districts are in the process of determining which of these three they're gearing up to do. And then starting next week, districts are going to start delivering one of these three services to the state. So I'm going to pass it back over to Adrian, who's going to talk about what's happening in Delaware.
Thank you very much. So similar to Iowa, we closed. We are back open now. We closed from the 10th to the 24th of March to give teachers an opportunity and LEAs an opportunity to develop their remote learning plans just in case we were going to go into remote learning. And then, of course, 1 week into that 2-week period, the governor decided we were going remote. We are remote until May 15, so that's 7 weeks of remote learning, and then we're going to wait and see if that changes before May 15 actually gets here. But we do have some rural parts of our small state as well, some challenges with equity, demographic issues in some of the urban areas in our state as well. So we have a combination of things going on, and we really, the type of services that we're offering kind of hinge on the 4 questions I've got listed there. Now, how much access to one-to-one devices are available for high schools? That's better for us. For urban and suburban areas, that's better for us. Internet access, from the notion of hotspots, how many do we need to get? Do we need to partner with certain industries to try to get internet access to our rural areas faster? And then we found that the LEAs still wanted to keep some sort of synchronous environment in their remote learning strategy. So the questions were how much synchronous instruction delivery was going to happen versus how much synchronous office hours or help was going to happen. We are having district employees come into the districts to help deliver meals to students who need them and families as well. So that is happening as well in Delaware, and we will all keep our fingers crossed that sometime in early May we will know what the next steps for us is going to be. So with that, I am going to pass the mic to Dawn. Hi, Dawn.
Hi, everybody. I kind of want to tell you it's a mix between what Jay and Alan had. We have been doing this for a little under a month now, and we were thrown into it just as everyone. And we came and met on the weekend. What are we going to do? We didn't have the opportunity for our kids to come back. So they went home, and we didn't know they wouldn't be back. So we got together, and we knew we had to feed them. That was priority. And we ravaged through the warehouse and got some highlights, some books, library books, and put those in with the food and tried to get things out to them immediately. Our teachers were told that they would need to get together a week full of instruction and send that out to them immediately. We also did not have an LMS in place. However, our gradebook has some great functionality that will allow us to send PowerPoints and videos and things like that. We've had teachers get very creative. They've recorded their videos of reading a book with their pets there, and the pets have helped them change the pages and things like that and sharing with each other. Things to keep the kids engaged. And we were instructed we have to do our IEP meetings, keep that up. So we were able to use our Office 365, which our state is so wonderful to provide for us, and all of those features. So we've really been using the teams to reach out to the students and get the instruction through. We've even had counselors doing self-help videos and things like that, just to reach the kids. We have told all of our teachers that they need to make contact with everybody at least once a week. If they are not able to contact them, then they are to let their principal and counselor know, just to check on them. We had, just in my neighborhood, my daughter told me, I was actually at work, but my daughter told me that the elementary school came down the subdivision doing a parade and dressed up in the mascot and everything, just again to pull those kids in, let them know, because it's hard on them as well as it is on us to figure out how we're going to handle. And it's just an ever-changing situation. We use Clever, so that was a godsend for us. All of the information was in that, so we could use a lot of digital tools through that. That was an easy transition. So it is just like everybody else. Some people were using the technology more. It was easy for them. Of course, all of our virtual courses that we had in place already, they're keeping right on going. And the rest of us are learning, and it is ever changing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dawn. And thanks to Alan and Jay and Adrian and Dean. We really appreciate the stories and the review of the guide. We do have a number of questions here, and we're going to try to get on with those. I don't know if we'll have enough time, certainly during the webinar, but we will see what we can do. The speakers have agreed to hang in there a little bit after the hour, so if you're able to hang in with us, that will be great. Our next slide, as you can see, is the information and resources. So the link to the virtual education guide that was described in this webinar, as well as a link to other forum resources that you can get access to. So we'll go ahead and start with the questions. One of the questions we have is asking for thoughts about addressing equity, and that is students who don't have equal access to resources like internet, devices, etc. Big question. Anybody Any one of our speakers want to take this one on?
I'll start. This is Alan. I'll just start real quick to say this is a huge conversation in North Shore. I mentioned how low our free and reduced lunch numbers are, which I always am concerned about in North Shore, helps us to ignore this a little bit, or not a little bit, a lot more than we actually should. And I'm very concerned that during this timeline, this time that we're in right now, is that we'll solidify some of the disparities that we already see with some of our underserved communities. I think it's a gigantic risk right now. I don't have a good solution, but I think we all have to be super mindful of it and be aware of the idea of, if we're forgiving ourselves by saying, well, this is just for right now, just to get through the minute, well, then we need to develop a plan so that if this happens again, it's not such a disparity, because it's a little bit disgraceful, I would say.
Absolutely. And
So
I do see we have a lot of folks that are hopping off, so we will provide written responses to the questions that we have. But if you can stay on, we'll do just a round robin for anyone else who wants to respond to this one.
So this is Jay. Just to add to what Alan said, I mean, so Iowa overall is about 43% free reduced price lunch, and that's really where what districts are, I think, a main consideration in terms of whether to go voluntary or required, is the ability to ensure that all kids have both a device as well as Wi-Fi internet access. I know I mentioned, earlier that we had a state level call with whoever wants to join. We've had up to 1,500 folks join in on those, and today's was around 800. And there's lots of really good questions about that same topic, right? Like, how do we ensure high quality while delivering to all? And there's, districts are, I've been amazed with the focus, how much districts are doing to try to ensure continuity of high quality education. Some districts are issuing devices, if they're able, to everyone, whether that's Wi-Fi or laptops. We as a state are putting together sort of a billboard where we can, districts can ask and request, hey, we need 100 laptops, and then we can put that out there to see, is there a business that would be willing, that perhaps has an inventory that could help alleviate that particular district issue. But I think that is one of the main considerations, is that equity issue.
TJ,
Uh,
any other
Yes,
thoughts?
from a Delaware perspective, we too are looking for business partnerships to serve some of the underserved youth in our communities, to get them the devices, especially if the LEA or the school in the neighborhood has chosen to do remote learning in such a way as to where they need a device.
And us too in West Virginia are looking at the hotspot issues of where we can get kids internet that does not currently have it. We do have some rural areas that just don't have the access.
Great. Well, thanks to all of you. Another quick question, because we still have quite a few people on. If a state has moved to all learning online, should all courses in the state be coded as virtual, even if they were not intended to be virtual prior to COVID-19? Interesting question and interesting tie-in to our webinar, our SCED webinar yesterday. Any thoughts about that from our panelists?
Yes, this is Adrian from Delaware. From a coding perspective, I would leave the classes coded as they are. So if they were traditional at the start of the year, I would keep them traditional now. What I would focus on, though, is the change in course grading that you get between the third and fourth marking period, and see if you can see any differences in there, as opposed to coding all courses as virtual.
Great. Any other panelists have a thought about that? That makes a lot
Fulton
of sense to
County
me.
does not have any plans to change the course numbers at this point unless we were directed by the state. But I can't imagine that we would change the course numbers at this point if they weren't virtual before.
I'm going to move to the next question. Thank you very much, Don. How much direction do you believe SEAs should give LEAs in collecting data during the pandemic? Should SEAs attempt to give guidance or generally let LEAs decide how to handle each scenario?
This is Alan. I would make sure that I prioritize that. I would say too much guidance is going to end up getting ignored, so I would recommend that the SEAs, if they are going to give a bunch of guidance, and I think we need to get some on what's going to work, is make sure that you prioritize it. One of the initial big struggles that we had with our state office was everybody telling us you need to keep doing and collecting and reporting data in exactly the same way that you were. And all that led to, I'll just speak frankly, folks know me, I'm going to speak frankly, on our end to say, well, we ain't doing that, so we'll just move on, and started ignoring everything. I would say prioritize your requests. We can do better moving forward, but in an environment like this, I would be careful.
From
Just to
Delaware's
add to,
perspective, yeah, go ahead, Jay, go ahead.
no, you go, Adrian.
Yeah, from Delaware's perspective, I mean, it's a much smaller state, much fewer LEAs, but we have taken a much less stringent approach. We've been asking them to just tell us what you're doing, but we're not making any hard and fast recommendations on what they should do to address the how, right? So we are concerned about equity. We are concerned about access. We are asking questions as opposed to making suggestions.
Yeah, just to add to what Adrian's saying, this is Jay from Iowa. The issue, like, let's take attendance as an example. We're strongly encouraging folks to take attendance in the required world, but how they do it is certainly a local decision. So we're thinking about our role more as a one that can provide guidance, but not necessarily be very strict in terms of how that data comes in, particularly during a crisis.
This is Dawn from Putnam County, West Virginia, and the state has been really good to help lead us through some of the major decisions we have to. It just helps if we're all doing the same thing. Of course, some decisions have to be made at the local level because of the different areas. But they have been really great to help us and provide instruction on, again, some of the tools that they provide. So, I would have to say that in West Virginia, it's been a partnership.
Thank you so much. So out of respect for everyone's schedules, we have a couple of things going on. We are going to go ahead and wrap up this webinar, but as you can see in the Q&A section, Alan has volunteered to go onto a Zoom call with those who would like to join. So you should be able to see that link in the Q&A section. We will also address all of the questions that are listed in the chat box right now. We'll address those, we'll write responses, and we'll send those out to folks. Also, I have the screen up now that has the contact information for each of today's speakers. And so if you heard something that you'd like to dig into a little more deeply and talk with, then you'll have their contact information in order to continue that conversation. And finally, I do want to thank everyone who joined today. Definitely want to thank our speakers. What an awesome job and what a difficult time. Hopefully we'll have some silver linings to all of this. As we indicated at the beginning, this webinar recording will be available to you all along with the PowerPoint deck in the Communities 360 website. And as a reminder, don't forget if you're available to join Alan with the Zoom contact information that's in the Q&A section. Thank you all so very much, and stay safe.